Probably. My sobriety date is December 12th, 2016. This is my home group. I have a sponsor and I sponsor other women. I'm friends with some really bougie people, and to hear the Newport Richie thing, it's just so funny to me, and if you don't know, just get with Kate or Caitlin after the meeting, I'll tell you all about it. Man, what a crazy ride to watch these girls get sober, and Stephanie too. It's like, I've pushed for them to succeed and to be here and to fall in love with Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's what happened to me, and I got to fall in love with AA right away. And I know that a lot of us don't come here and feel that right away, and that's okay. But that was a virtue for me, to fall in love with the newcomer, to fall in love with the old timer, and to watch, and witness hand in hand these girls' journeys. And it's just such a cool deal, and I employ 4 of them. So it's it's tough at times, but we do this thing together. I have sat down and inventoried with the women I work with all the time. We do prayer circles. We used to smoke crack and we're doing prayer circles, it's just crazy. It's just wild. And what a different life. So, right, she's only done it once. I know, I got it. I've never done it at all, so it's fine. So anyway, I love this home group. This has been my home group for 5 years, and man, this became my home group in the middle of COVID, and it really rocketed me into the 4th dimension, Oh, I hate myself. No, but it really did, and this group helped me catch fire again with Alcoholics Anonymous in so many ways, and there's just an instant family here. There's an instant love and connection to Alcoholics Anonymous and to each other that, we'll take anybody in AA, but this group particularly, really, we'll just take anybody in and love you, and it's really a beautiful thing. Especially since I was intolerable, for a really long time. It's okay. I know who I am. So I'm going to go into a little bit of my drinking and try to speed this up and get to the solution. So I believe that I was born an alcoholic. My parents met in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Me and my brother both ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Every family member that isn't in Alcoholics Anonymous probably should be. There's a lot of disease and there's a lot of addiction in my family. I really didn't stand a chance of not ending up here. However, that was my aim in life. So when I figured out that, my parents were in AA and my brother was in AA, I was so that's the goal. So drink and do drugs, but not to the point where I need AA. Cool, got it. And that didn't work out, obviously. But the first time I tried alcohol, one of the first times I got really drunk. I was 16, it was 6 a.m. in the morning before high school. Great time to get drunk. And all I really remember from that night from that day, was just being really messed up by biology, and thinking that I could connect to the world and the community and the people in this, school, for the first time. I had so much worry and insecurity and doubt about who I was, about how I presented, about what you thought of me in this prison, and when I drank alcohol, it all just went away. It all just melted away like butter, and the thing is that I was addicted to that feeling, I wanted that feeling all the time. And so I did everything in my power that I could to be as messed up as possible. But like I said, my parents were in AA, so they pretty much knew the deal as far as what alcoholism and drug addiction looked like. So I got caught a lot. I didn't really get to experience a full-blown, alcohol journey until I got to college. And so when I got to college, I did what a lot of people in college do. I drank all the time. A lot of my time was spent thinking about a drink, how to get a drink. I had specific people in my life that we call them plugs now. That was a thing I needed to have in a couple different directions, I really like that term, dealer. It's ugh, you're so old. you know. But so anyway, like I had all these people in place to make sure that I never was without, you know, and that's how it was. Like I was committed. I was really committed to being messed up. There was never a day that I was gonna allow at that point to go by where I wasn't able to. And it didn't matter who distrusted me. It didn't matter who I had to take from or lie from or manipulate. I had to do what I had to do, and I needed to be messed up in some fashion. And I was only 18, so it didn't work out, you know, super well, and it didn't last long. And so I ended up in my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting when I was 18, and I was introduced to this concept that really just like went over my head. But my brother, being a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous, brought me to a meeting. He brought me to 3333 in Tampa. And it's a clubhouse, and but he talked to me about like the disease, you know, and that I have an allergy to alcohol, and that once I start, I can't stop, and that without it, I can't stop thinking about it. And he like relayed all of these like real life experiences to me, and I was like, I don't really think it's that bad yet, you know. And but the information was given to me, and so this seed got planted. And by the time I left my first meeting, I was probably making a mountain out of a molehill, and I went back to drinking. However, I really had nothing left. I didn't have a lot of money, you know, and I didn't have a lot of friends. My parents were really sick of me, and the only reason I still had my job was because the boss was my boyfriend, which is a theme, and you know, I was just really empty. I was really empty. And what happens for me when I stop drinking is I become suicidal. Because my problem is not what happens to me when I drink. You put enough alcohol in any good Christian, they're gonna act a little weird, you know? Like they might make questionable decisions. My problem is that when you separate me from alcohol, I'm worse. I'm so much worse, you know, and I need something. I need something to not feel what I'm feeling. And so when I come to AA and I'm presented with this idea that I need to put it down, well, you're kidding, right? Like, I'm gonna commit suicide. Like, I hope you're ready, you know? And so my attitude reflected that, and I let people know how uncomfortable I was sober in AA. And I kept coming back because obviously, you know, nobody else wanted me. And but you know, my brother was really cool, and I've always been the like younger sister of the cool of the brother. And everybody loved him in AA. And if they didn't want to be him, they wanted to date him. And I was the sister, so it like made me cool. And I just loved that about being in AA. So this idea of attraction got me to my second meeting. And so the attraction of my brother changing and becoming this like better person, because he was so bad before, you know, like he was feisty and angry and a liar and just nuts, you know, and to see him this cool guy that everybody loved all of a sudden, it was just like, I want that. I want to be part of that, you know. So he got me to my next meeting, and that meeting was the Tampa Bay Young People's Group, which then became my home group quickly thereafter. And that was my home group for the next 6 years. I never have gone without a home group. If you don't have a home group, you're homeless in AA. You're homeless in AA. And it was like drilled into me so vividly that like, if I don't have a home group, I don't have a seed or a seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I'm going to leave. And I was like, whoa, that's really intense, you know? And, but I watched it happen. I watched people not get roots here and leave, you know? And today, if I missed this meeting, people will call me. If other people that are main fixtures here that I know are members here, if they're not here, I call them. You know, like we become a family here. And so I got a home group. And, you know, I was told to sit in the front. I was told to pick up trash. I was told to not get up during the meeting, not talk during the meeting, not be on my phone during the meeting. Did we have phones in 2009? Yeah? Okay. It wasn't like quite as savvy as it is now. Like I could text, I couldn't like shop. But anyway, I was like given all of these ideas, with the foundation of respecting Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't know what that was at the time. I thought somebody was just trying to be bossy and like tell me what to do. Which if you're 18, like you don't take too well to that, you know? It just like wasn't really my flavor to be like bossed around by some 20-year-old who was a year sober, you know? And, but I despite my feelings about it, and despite like spewing that all over people by saying things like I hate it here, I did what was required anyway, you know, like against my own will. I sat in the front, I picked up your trash, I put away your chairs, and I hated you for it. And, but I got to stay sober. And right after I turned 19, it was July 27th of 2009, I got sober and I stayed sober for the next 7 years. And what happened in the next 7 years was, I don't want to say that the whole time was like not good sobriety, because there was a lot of time that there was, you know, a connection to Alcoholics Anonymous and a connection to a sponsor was never missing. But as far as like growth and a connection to a higher power, that was usually pretty lost and pretty low on my priority list. When I got sober, it was an era of time that a lot of young people were doing a lot of service and not a lot of recovery. Like, not a lot of inventory, do I recall taking, you know, or prayer circles, you know, with crackheads. Like, that wasn't happening, you know, back then. And I was young and I was dumb and there were plenty of us to go around, you know, and it's like I got to understand that I could have fun in sobriety, so it wasn't a bad thing, you know, but I was really active and I was in the FICCIPA Young People's Committee, and that's the Florida Conference of Young People in AA, if you don't know, and it was a crazy thing, you know, like 1,000 alcoholics were in like Port St. Lucie with like Red Bulls by the dozens. You know, and people are like chugging the Red Bulls at the pool, and it's like, you know, when you punch the hole in the bottom, and it's like, did I get sober? Like, what is happening? You know, but I look back at those times and I just have such beautiful memories of like having fun in sobriety and knowing that like getting sober wasn't a death sentence. You know, I had not had a legal drink. I was pretty certain that like this was never gonna be good. You know, I thought Starbucks and Scrabble was like my future. And thank God, you know, like I didn't have to stay and hate it here. I really came to love Alcoholics Anonymous pretty quickly, you know, in comparison to the memory of that. So I was about 18 months sober, and my primary focus at this point was to find a guy, like a husband, boyfriend first, maybe, you know, whatever. And I found one, you know, and he was about 4 months sober, living in a halfway house. Seemed like he was ready, you know. And my sponsor at the time told me to leave him alone until he had a year, so I got a new sponsor. And, you know, we were good, you know, against all odds, you know, like we did pretty good for a minute, you know, and don't get me wrong, like, will your sobriety be harder if you get in a relationship early on? Yeah. You know, will you drink because of it? Maybe, maybe not. Like, I think we take a drink because we want to take a drink. You know, we don't want to look at ourselves and do the work and get a relationship with God. I have stayed sober through many messy relationships. So if you have someone in your life that's telling you, you know, leave whoever alone or I won't sponsor you, I'm available, you know, because I get it. I absolutely get it. You know, and I think staying with him helped me stay here, you know, for good or bad. We both had to be here. We both came to Alcoholics Anonymous together. And he had a sponsor and I had a sponsor, and we had our own programs, you know. But, you know, he didn't do it right, and I told him that all the time. And that's a character defect I still have. Sorry, honey. So anyway, a couple of years later, I ended up getting pregnant, and it wasn't something I had planned, and I got really scared. And I hadn't really faced anything like big at this point. I was 24 years old, I was 5 years sober, and I got afraid to have a baby. And so I made a decision to have an abortion. And when I'm at a fork in the road today, where it feels like I have option A or B, there's a couple of things that I need to do. One of those things I need to do is call a sponsor. If my sponsor's not available, another woman who's also on this path. I need to pray. I need to write an inventory. I need to meditate. I need to listen for intuition. I didn't do any of that, and I was afraid. And do I know if the outcome would have been different had I done those things? No. But I know that that decision was made in fear. And after that decision, I woke up, from that, and I regretted it immediately, and I just thought, that I made the wrong choice, and I knew that I couldn't undo that. And I came to regret that for quite a few years, to come, and I think I've done a lot of work on that and stuff since then, but, I really sunk. I sunk really low, and I thought that I needed to move away. That was like kind of my first attempt to outrun myself. And so I took my boyfriend, from the halfway house, and we moved away. We moved to New Jersey, where he was from, and we moved in with his parents, and within 2 months of moving there, I got arrested for assault on his mom. 6 years sober. I want to report that I have not been to jail in 5 years. And I'm 9 years sober. So anyway, when you beat up somebody's mom, it's hard to stay together. And we broke up, and I couldn't come back to Florida and say that I had made a mistake. I couldn't come back here and say, I should never have moved away. And my ego was just so far from allowing me to admit something like that. And so I set out on this path to make it work in New Jersey, where I knew absolutely nobody. And so I had this loss. I had this loss of this relationship and the baby and the future I thought I was going to have, and I'm lost. I'm just lost in not having a God and not having a foundation anymore. And I was just so self-reliant, and I had 7 sponsors within a year. I don't recommend that. If things are happening like that for you, you're not in a good place. I'm just letting you know that. I was unsponsorable. I knew everything. I knew everything about the big book. I knew more than about the traditions. Nobody could teach me something I didn't know. And I don't recall praying that entire year. At one point, I became so unemployable. I would get a job, really good at getting jobs. And I would get the job, and they would, look at my resume that wasn't true and be really excited about having me, And then 2 weeks later, they figure out the storm that's brewing, and they're just like, we can't have you, you're a liability. And that happened over and over and over. And I was just falling so fast away from self and away from any worth and any value that I had and that I had gained in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I'm almost 7 years sober, and I threatened my life, right? I can't drink, I get that, but I'm gonna threaten my life. And I call the ex-boyfriend, of course, and he comes to my rescue, and he Baker X me. And it's my safe space, hey, you get it, so get it. So I'm in the psych ward, I'm approaching 7 years sober. There's obviously a lot of people in psych wards that need AA, And so I, in my distorted perception, believe that God has placed me there to deliver the message, you know? And I don't know. Did I? I don't know. I was encouraged to tell this part of the story. I really don't like to because it's not super relevant, but whatever. When I was in the psych ward, I started to believe that I could no longer walk. And I love you so much. So what that meant was that I was in a wheelchair, right? Because I told them I could no longer walk. And they told me that I had to stay in, they told me, I thought that's what I heard, that I needed to stay in the wheelchair. And so I left the psych ward in the wheelchair. They wouldn't give me the one from the psych ward, so I went to CVS and I rented a wheelchair. You can do that, it's like $50. And I stayed in that wheelchair for 7 weeks. 7 years sober, picked up my medallion in the wheelchair. And I could walk, y'all. I was fine. Just so deluded, so delusional. I had developed stories in my head that were feeling real. I had told so many lies that it became unfathomable what was the truth anymore. You know, and I was really into like online dating at the time, so I would like hit people up on, it's not Twitter, what's it called?
Hinge? Oh, sorry.
Tinder, thank you. It's been a long time. So I was really into Tinder, and I would like show up to the date in the wheelchair, you know, and like, I was like, just, it's temporary, like, it's not a big deal, you know, and, you know, they were a little freaked out, but like, it was fine, you know, and, so anyway, that's what 7.5 years looked like for me, you know, so like, of course I took a drink, you know, like, of course I took a drink. And I was the last one to see it coming. And, you know, I want to be clear, like, I did not drink because Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't work. Like, I took a drink because I was out of my mind. Like, clearly. I mean, but in reality, like, truly, the principles behind what I had learned about Alcoholics Anonymous were no longer relevant because fear and self was driving my life. I couldn't earn a living if I didn't steal it from you. I couldn't feel safe and secure without whoever next to me in bed. I needed so much that I wasn't receiving from God and Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why I drank. You know, and the way that it looked was just gnarly for me, you know, and I probably lasted longer than anyone expected. So when I drank, I was determined to not come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason for that was not because AA didn't work, because I love AA, and I was, you know, trying to tell people that I was getting high with later, like, we should go back to AA, you know, and like, here's the big book, like, here's what this says. And like, I never lost faith in the big book, and I never lost faith in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I had become predatory in the rooms of AA. And, you know, when I was just getting ready to go out in my, like, last 30 days, I was just dating, like, a slew of newcomers, you know, and just, like, really taking away people's opportunity to get sober here. And it's not about, like, can you do that and stay sober? It's like, I knew that wasn't cool. You know, that somebody with a week sober should not be here with me, you know? And I was really, really sick, and it took a long time for that shame and what I knew about myself to change. So I wasn't gonna come back here, you know, and I didn't want to do that again. But of course, I ended up back in Alcoholics Anonymous, and because I had been in AA back in Florida for a while, I had made connections and stayed in touch with people, and one of the girls that I had sponsored was still sober, and she figured out a way to get me out of Jersey and come back to Florida. And so like this full circle experience started to happen where they say like, be nice to newcomers, they might sponsor you one day. Like that happened. And this girl became like my lifeline to Alcoholics Anonymous, where where I had taken her hand, and placed it in God's hands like 8 years before, and I'm pretty sure I didn't want to do that day. Like, I was so inconvenienced by newcomers all the time. But, you know if you know. So I come back here and with a humility that I had never known, and I was just unrecognizably defeated. Just defeated by my own self-will and my own decisions. And I was pretty certain that, like, this was who I was and who I was going to stay, and that it was unrepairable. And I think a lot of us feel that way when we get here. That is not a unique situation. That's not a unique feeling to have, that we've come too far and we've gone too far low to come back up, and that's not true. I've seen so many crazy, desperate situations righted here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm no exception. I'm so different. I'm so different today. I'm the person I always wanted to be. And really I was the person I always made fun of. But over time it's become, the person I want to be. And so anyway, a lot's happened in the last 9 years, and I brought tissues. I knew this was going to happen. Thank you. Thank you. So my sobriety date back is 12/12/16. It was right before Christmas. And I got to show up for my family, 2 weeks sober, and be part of Christmas. And I sat in an alkathon all night. I sat in a meeting for like 2.5 days during Christmas, and that's what I knew to do. My feet were trained. Recovery is in your feet. My feet were trained to show up here. And my feet were trained to stick close to women and stick close to a sponsor. And I did do that. And I don't have a lot of time to go into the next insanity, but I'm going to tell you about the last couple of years. So about 5 years ago, I joined this home group, and I had started trying to implement a path where I believed that God was going to give me a man. Because I had just done it wrong for so long, and I had reached a point of surrender about 5 years ago where it was just like, I don't know what I need, I'm done trying. So I joined this home group though, and there's a lot of cuties and a lot of eligible bachelors, and I'm just looking around, and I find a guy, and his name's Mark Fry, and we went on a date, and it was a beautiful thing, and it was amazing, and it wasn't something I orchestrated, and it wasn't something that I wanted and pushed to have happen. It just happened so organically and so divinely, and that had not happened before. I'm the type of girl that will trap you in a corner real quick and make you think it was an accident, therefore we're together, now get married. I'm a stage 5 clinger with serious issues. I do not do this well. And so this new experience starts to happen, right? And I meet this guy, and he's amazing. And I have a little boy, and his dad's not in the picture yet, so maybe Mark could be the dad, and I'm watching this unfold, and it's beautiful. And then we find out 9 months later that I'm pregnant again, and we're gonna have a baby. And it feels so right, and it feels so perfect. And God is really making my dreams come true, And then he drank. And I was just like, God, what are you doing? And it was this really good experience though, because it finally smashed the idea that a human being could be my higher power. And I had learned that lesson over and over and over again, that my self-worth and my self-determination had to come from God, not a human being. And so he drank, and I was like, what do I do with that? And I was pregnant, so I was pregnant with this baby, and he left, and I didn't know what to do, And so I wrote, and I prayed, and I talked to my sponsor, and I talked to my friends that had a God, and I borrowed their God to help work through this problem. And all this writing and all this praying comes back, and it says, do nothing. I'm sorry, like, I don't do nothing, especially when my future baby dad is not sober. We need to rectify that now, you know? And what I wanted to do was, you know, kidnap him, put him in a closet, make him write his 4-step, pick out his sponsor, you know, make sure that we got together again when then he showed up as a father, you know, and so I did nothing, right? Like that's what came back, and he got sober, and we got back together, you know, and I didn't do that, I didn't make that happen. And God made that happen, and I don't squander that today, you know. I'm a mother of 2 kids, and they're alive and well, and Mark is an incredible father. Like I have a life today that I didn't know I wanted, and I'm a person today that I never would have even liked. And it's all due to a relationship with a higher power. So thank you guys. Are you crying?
We have passed the basket in accordance with the 7th tradition. Also, the second